Do you want to be a millionaire? This must be the most controversial question. What if we told you that we have an old secret to become rich? Curious enough? Franklin's insights into wealth are just as relevant several centuries later. In fact, one CEO says the single best piece of money advice she's ever heard comes from the 259-year-old text. What was Franklin's way to wealth? You want to learn this old secret? Stay tuned to find out how to get rich. Ben Franklin, for me, become a bit of a role model. Caitlin Gleason, CEO and founder of Eligible, tells CNBC. He was an inventor. He was an entrepreneur. He himself was in debt at one time. One insight in particular from The Way to Wealth has stuck with Gleason. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. It's timeless advice that has worked for the wealthiest, most successful people of today. As author Steve Seibold writes in his book on self-made millionaires, How Rich People Think, the world class would rather be educated than entertained. The most successful people appreciate the power of learning long after their school years are over, he writes. Walk into a wealthy person's home and one of the first things you'll see is an extensive library of books they've used to educate themselves on how to become more successful. Franklin also touched on more tangible money advice in The Way to Wealth. A man may, if he knows now how to save as he gets, keep his nose all his life to the grindstone and die not worth a groat at last, the founding father wrote. If you would be wealthy, think of saving as well as getting. In other words, while making money is important, rich people do and tend to. Wealth is also defined by how much your income you're able to keep and make work for you. Summary: Father Abraham and Poor Richard. The Way to Wealth begins with a note addressed to the courteous reader. The narrator in Poor Richard, also known as Richard Saunders. These are the pseudonyms or false names under which Benjamin Franklin wrote and published his famous almanac. Poor Richard describes a recent encounter with a group of people at an auction who were complaining about how high the taxes were. The people asked Father Abraham, a clean, old man with white locks, for advice on how to have enough money to pay their taxes. Father Abraham begins his speech with a series of Poor Richard's sayings, and the narrator is delighted at being quoted. Poor Richard narrates a brief paragraph at the end of The Way to Wealth. However, the rest of the essay is Father Abraham's speech. The speech is largely made up of well-known sayings that have been written and published in Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac over the previous 25 years. Making the most of one's time. Father Abraham first comments on the fact that taxes are not the real problem. Personal failings are the actual reason why most people do not have as much money as they would like. Father Abraham states, "We are taxed twice as much by our idleness, 3 times as much by our pride, and 4 times as much by our folly." He advises people to make the most of their limited time by claiming, "Lost time is never found again." Healthy daily life habits help people use their time wisely and in turn achieve financial success. Father Abraham quotes Poor Richard saying, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." Father Abraham encourages people to actively seize opportunities in life that others may be too lazy to notice. Plow deep while sluggards sleep, and you shall have corn to sell and to keep. Father Abraham states, "Little strokes fell great oaks." This means that small efforts add up to larger achievements. The statement demonstrates the importance of daily habits of hard work and diligence. Living frugally and spending judiciously. Father Abraham warns against laziness and encourages people to exert effort and make sacrifices in the service of their financial goals. He urges that the best way to achieve wealth is not only to earn money, but also to avoid spending it on frivolous things. He states, "If you'd be wealthy, think of saving as well as getting." He criticizes people who waste money on things like fancy clothing or gourmet foods when they should be providing and saving for their families. Father Abraham comments, "What maintains one vice would bring up 2 children." The small expenses that support immoral habits can add up and harm a family's ability to survive. After Father Abraham has given advice to work diligently, to earn money and save as much money as possible, he addresses the damage that a person can experience as a debtor. A debtor is a person who owes money to another person or organization known as a creditor. Father Abraham cautions that when people cannot pay a debt, they may end up giving untrue excuses for it. He says, "Lying rides in upon debt's back." Poverty and debt can affect a person's ability to act morally because it's hard for an empty bag to stand upright. Father Abraham returns to the fleeting nature of time and reminds his audience that gain may be temporary and uncertain, but ever while you live, expense is constant and certain. Poor Richard's advice is to work and earn while it's possible to do so, since there will always be expenses associated with life. Human frailty. Father Abraham draws his speech to his conclusion with a series of humorous comments about the general foolishness of humanity. He pokes fun at an established fact that people often have to learn by doing something wrong rather than through listening to wise advice like Poor Richard's sayings. Franklin's humor is evident in sayings like, "Experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other." And, "If you'll not hear reason, she will surely rap your knuckles." Father Abraham uses Poor Richard's sayings to advise his listeners to adopt moral, upright, frugal habits, while at the same time acknowledging that most people struggle to maintain such habits. Poor Richard looks back. Father Abraham's speech is followed by a brief concluding paragraph signed by Richard Saunders, the full name of Poor Richard. Poor Richard explains that after the old gentleman ended his harangue, the people in the room immediately went and did the opposite of everything Father Abraham had advised. Poor Richard refers humorously to his delight at being quoted so extensively. He humbly qualifies this by explaining that the sayings represent more than just his own personal work. Poor Richard explains in closing that the memorable and meaningful sayings he had published over the years represent the gleanings I had made of the sense of all ages and nations. Analysis. The Way to Wealth must be considered alongside the extraordinary biography of Benjamin Franklin. Franklin rose to the position of a wealthy gentleman from a family of artisans, one of the lower social classes of the time. As the 10th son of 17 children, Franklin was not positioned to inherit a trade as would a firstborn son. He only received 2 years of formal education, one in a school and one with a private tutor. He educated himself while working all day and staying up until late hours to learn, create, invent, and write. Franklin truly embodied Poor Richard's advice that diligence is the mother of good luck. Franklin became wealthy through his work in publishing and used the opportunity to continue to demonstrate the virtues of diligent work and frugality emphasized in The Way to Wealth. Franklin contributed much to the world through his publishing, scientific discoveries, inventions, and public service. He would not have been able to accomplish many of these things without the wealth that he earned. Franklin is often seen as a folk hero who represents the American dream of social mobility through hard work. Benjamin Franklin often used personas, or characters who represent the voice of the author in his work. One of his early publications was a satirical piece he wrote for his brother's newspaper at the age of 16. It was published under the pseudonym Silence Dogood. The pseudonym allowed Franklin to establish a persona of a middle-aged woman and speak using her voice. Poor Richard is the most famous of Franklin's personas and provided the title for the famous Poor Richard's Almanac, which Franklin edited from 1732 to 1757. Poor Richard's full name is Richard Saunders. He's a humble, unassuming man who lives in the country and dispenses advice about the importance of hard work, frugality, and diligence. Poor Richard uses practical and relatable metaphors to illustrate his points, such as, "The sleeping fox catches no poultry," and "There will be sleeping enough in the grave." Franklin used the persona of Poor Richard to express sayings that reflected a down-to-earth point of view about life without claiming these ideas as if he were signing them with his own name. Another persona of Franklin in The Way to Wealth is Father Abraham. He's an old man who brings together many of Poor Richard's sayings in a speech that is like a religious sermon in that he offers advice for moral behavior. He weaves the quotes of Poor Richard together so that they form a clear statement about the importance of hard work, frugality, and restraint. Franklin thus gives his readers a review of over 2 decades of advice from Poor Richard, a persona that had become a household name through the voice of another persona, Father Abraham. The use of 2 personas allows Franklin to experiment with his writing and express multiple perspectives by using different voices.